everybody. Thank you for coming to this talk about Backstage. Before we jump in, I'm Lee. I'm an engineering manager at Spotify. I've been there for about 4 years. I have never touched the music app, so please don't ask me how do we build a music app, how do we work in there or do those things. Never done it. In that time at Spotify, I have been purely focused on Backstage. When I started at Spotify, Backstage was this small project with, I think there was 8 to 9 engineers initially focused on Backstage, and it was purely for Spotify. It was an internal tool. All of our users sat next to us, which was fantastic. And it was all about improving the productivity at Spotify itself. Fast forward to today, and that's no longer the case. We open sourced back in 2020, and now actually we're touching close to about, I think, 4 million engineers that are impacted by Backstage. But we'll get more into that. So, shaping the future of developer productivity with Backstage. So what we're going to do, we're just going to run through just a quick kind of intro about Backstage itself. We're going to take a look at the open source community. If I'm feeling brave enough, I might then try and do a live demo, but I don't know if the demo gods are with me today, so it might end up being a video. And then we're going to go into a couple of examples, some tips, and some things that are coming from the community as well. So I've said it 4 or 5 times already, Backstage, 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 Backstage. What is Backstage? So if you go to backstage.io, our website, this is what it will tell you Backstage is. It's an open platform for building developer portals. Fantastic. Talk done, everybody understand that? That's it, I'm off, right? What does that mean? What does that actually mean? So let's start with probably the most important words in that sentence, developer portal. And to understand developer portal, I want to show you this picture. It's really small when it's up on that big screen, actually. I should have thought that through a bit more. This, if you've not seen this before, this is the CNCF Landscape, the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. They're an organization that helps and support many different open source projects, each of which you can see up on here. If you look really, 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 really closely, you can see Backstage on there. I've got a free bottle of water for anyone that can point it out. We're in there somewhere. But the reason to bring this up, complexity. So back when I was engineering on a day-to-day basis, could be pretty comfortable with my IDE, with a terminal open, and a couple of browser windows open of the things that I was working on. Today, as an engineer, that's very, very different. If we distill this down, so this is just a screen grab from one of the engineers the other day. There's a couple of tools on there that are not necessarily focused purely on engineering, but all focused around the day-to-day life of an engineer. Maybe you get 500 emails from your manager each day. Fantastic. Maybe you've got a spreadsheet of things that you need to be working with. But you can see multiple tabs of GitHub open there. There's some around Kubernetes. There's G-Cloud stuff. There's Stack Overflow. There's all sorts of bits and pieces. And this is where developer portals come in. Can we take this complexity and make it much, much simpler? When you have all of those tabs, when you're working with all of those tools, the challenge that you get is the cognitive load. It's the switching between different contexts, different tasks, different aspects of the day-to-day that create a lot of the challenge. It's no longer I can bury myself in my IDE, know everything that I need to do there and then, and kind of deliver the thing that I'm trying to work against. I need to be thinking about what other people are pushing in GitHub. I need to be thinking about, with G-Cloud up there, or maybe it's AWS or Azure, and all of the settings up there. I'm thinking about CI/CD. And switching between those things is the things that slow me down. They're the things that make it hard for me to stay focused. So can we take that and can we distill this down? This is where developer portals come in. There are many. There's not just one. There's not just Backstage. But the idea behind Backstage is, can we create a single pane of glass that exposes a lot of this information in context? So not just, here's 200 different views of GitHub and this and that and the other. What's the context you're working on? So for example, if I'm working on an authentication service, it'll show me that authentication service, then it'll show me all of the relevant information. It'll show me my pipelines, it'll show me my documentation, it'll show me my GitHub interactions in context of that authentication service. So can we not remove the complexity, but help to distill it down and remove some of that cognitive load in switching between? So here's another way to look at it. Here's another way to think about it. Backstage came to Spotify, if you will. It came up as an idea around this bottom bubble here, chaos control. Spotify at the time was going through hypergrowth. We were bringing in so many engineers. We were trying to achieve so many things at speed and growing in scale. And what happened, as one example, going back to authentication services, was we had 15 of them. You had authentication services that worked with HR services. You had authentication services that were for web only. You had authentication services for mobile. You had authentication services for Tuesday afternoon if it was raining and you were standing on one leg. And you had to make all of these decisions around this growing number of services. Backstage for us started as an inventory service. It became, we have all of these different services and components kind of floating around. And it became, how can we inventorize that? How can we give engineers just a list? Here's all the services that we have. So when you're sitting down and making this decision of, oh, I need to, solve this task, you can quickly make a decision, should I create this new thing, this new component, this new service, or have we got something that I can already use? That was the basic fundamental starting point around Backstage. Inventory service, and we added on who owned it. So then you could go and contact them and say, hey, we're doing this thing, can I use this? Is it going to be useful for me? So Backstage is a developer portal, starting out in inventory, came as a result of the speed we wanted to run at, the scale we were starting to operate at, and trying to bring control to some of that chaos that was a result of that situation. So going back to that sentence, that's up on Backstage.io. That's developer portals. What about the other part, an open platform for? I don't remember this slide, but here's this slide. It's very nice. It's got a rocket on it. That's randomly in there. That shouldn't be there. OK, open. Open as in open source. It is a free and open source platform. It is always going to be a free and open source platform. It is a tool. It is a vehicle to unlock your creativity, your ownership. We don't want to dictate, this is how you should this is how you should be a software engineer. This is how you should operate. Instead, we want to give you the tools, the platform, the connections underneath to unlock the way that you want to work, to unlock the way that you feel you can contribute. So to do that, what we did early on, we had a plan back in January of 2020 to open source Backstage. And it was a beautiful plan. We had all these Gantt charts and things. It was, right, we're going to ship this in November of 2020. If you followed the project, if you've seen the project, you'll see that we actually open sourced it in March of 2020. So we actually, rather than taking 9, 10 months, We cut that all the way down to a month and a half and launched the project into the open source. Why did we do that? In all frankness, I had a very good conversation with somebody at the CNCF. And as somebody from Manchester, I'm prone to swearing, so I'm trying my best not to include that in the conversation right now. But effectively, we were told that's a silly plan to launch it in November. Open source it now, and rather than it being a fully fleshed and complete product, open source what you've got and build it with the community. Rather than saying, here's a finished thing, go nuts. Instead, leverage the community, bring in all their great perspectives, all of their great ideas, and build it with them. Let it be something that can support them too. You can also bring the Spotify expertise, but make sure you bring in all of these different perspectives. So that's what we did. And in March, we open sourced it, and it was the best decision we ever made for the project. Right now, where the project sits, roughly within the past few weeks, we've got a lot of stars. We've got just passed over 1,000 contributors. So what that looks like in GitHub is lots and lots of PRs, lots and lots of ideas, lots and lots of discussions. In Discord, where the majority of our community lives, there's now over 9,000 very active members, very supportive members. You'll even find Discord messages of me going into the community and asking them, how do I do this in Backstage again? Because it's such a big project, even I forget sometimes. So that's where we stand right now in open source, with a few more. So that's from a contributor perspective. From an organization perspective, we've got just over 1,000 companies that are in the process of adopting Backstage. This can be anywhere from they're running a trial, they're kind of implemented it with a few teams, all the way through to it's implemented across their R&D organization. There's 1,000 plus more companies evaluating, and we run these office hours every week. You can come and, at the moment, you can come and talk to me. It's me that's organizing them. But in the past 5 months, there's been over 200 different organizations come in and ask us about Backstage as well. And going back to another blank slide randomly in my deck, as I said up at the top, it's really hard to know because it's open source. So I cannot give you a specific number. But going off the size of companies that we know that have adopted it, we're roughly impacting about 4 million engineers now with Backstage, which going from 2020, where we were hopeful this would be something that would help the community, to now being in a place where we're affecting so many engineers is mind-blowing. Still mind-blowing for me every time I read that. And you can see some of that kind of passion coming to fruition in the extensibility of Backstage. We're going to get into how Backstage helps engineers momentarily. But I can, if I can get my mouse on the right screen, yes, and I do that. I think it's this one. OK, so you can see these are all plugins, extensions, if you will, to Backstage, built by the community. So oftentimes people will come and say, hey, do you integrate with this? Do you have a thing that does that? Oftentimes it's either already been built or it is in discussion within the community. And then for each of these, I'm going to pick Circle CI as random. You can click into, and you can see the kind of work that people are doing. So here's the Circle CI plugin for Backstage. And the idea is it doesn't replace Circle CI. Engineers are still going to go to the Circle CI site. They're still going to use it. They're still going to get the depth of information from there. But what it does do is, again, it's all about surfacing relevant information in context at the right time. So this is just one example. Back on, it's really hard to do your mouse almost like back to front, upside down. You can see there's lots and lots and lots of plugins up here. And there's even more than what is listed on this side. So going back. OK, sustainable open source model. One of the reservations when we were open sourcing Backstage, or when we were thinking about open sourcing Backstage, was some reservations from within Spotify itself. If we open source this, what does this mean? Are we then going to be funding a project that is going completely external? What's the benefit for us? How are we funding this for the engineers, for the teams, and things like this? And there was a couple of points during the process that really helped us to get kind of stakeholders on board with Spotify, with Backstage. So initially, we talked a lot about kind of different perspectives, bringing in different voices from the community and helping to shape our vision of where Backstage is going to go. We also, being, you could say it's maybe selfish, but thinking about recruitment. This was an opportunity to show what we could do and show the community and maybe encourage some people to come and work with us at Spotify. Once we open source, so in open sourcing, we dedicated 2 full teams, full-time, for 12 months in open source. That was the original kind of like sign-off. This is the runway that I've got. This is what we can work with. We open sourced it in February, as I said. About a week after we open sourced it, we were trending on Hacker News. That was nice. It was trending in a way, though, that was, what is Backstage? Why is it here? It does so many things I don't understand. So it needed some massaging. We needed to work on how we can communicate about it. We started trending on GitHub, and the community started to grow. And one of the first things, it sounds really silly, but for years, when Backstage was a private project at Spotify, we were asked by our internal engineers, can we have dark mode? Now, I'm a person that runs everything in light mode. I like to burn my eyeballs out. But a lot of engineers like dark mode, right? And we got this request for probably years, but we never did anything of it. We always thought, hey, we want to integrate documentation. We want to integrate search. We want to integrate X, Y, or Z. And dark mode fell down the list. The interesting thing is when we kind of open source and we put this out into the community, we put out an issue. We called it an RFC, a request for comment. And we put some pictures on there that one of our designers just scamped up, just mocked up in Figma of Backstage in a dark mode. And we put it on there and said, hey, we would love this. This is what we're thinking. We're not actively working on it right now, but just so everybody knows, this is what's happening. Within 24 hours, the community picked up that issue, went through, added comments, implemented it, and shipped us a PR back. Not only that, but a PR that was compatible with the full Backstage system that we had internally at Spotify. And it's only minor. Dark mode, light mode. It's not like, we're not introducing ChatGPT into Backstage. But it was something visual. It was something greatly appreciated by the engineers. And from a stakeholder standpoint, oh my God, we've got a community of now what is 1,000? And look at this. We needed this thing, and within 24 hours, something we've been asking for years is now implemented. So the power of the community is tremendous. It's also terrifying. That's 1,000 other opinions that possibly might not align with what you think we should be doing or what.
Yeah. Okay, have the microphone until I sort you out.
Switch for this one.
Yeah, but I can get you a new one.
All right, okay. Okay, that works. I broke something. Mission achieved. Okay. I don't know why it keeps doing this. I don't know what has happened to... Aha, it's animations, and I don't know how to use slide decks. So we've talked a lot about Backstage as in it's out there, it's in the community, it's developer productivity focused, but we haven't really talked about how, why, or what. Well, we've talked about the why, I suppose. So the 3 ways that we think about Backstage. So the first one is speed. Talked a little bit about that up at the top. We want people to be able to operate at speed in their teams without being slowed down by extra tools like Backstage or the context switching piece. The most exciting thing we'll talk about all day today, standards. Yay. No, okay. Whenever I like the standards one. Whenever I put this up, everyone kind of always looks at me like, standards? We talk about GDPR, ITGC, like all, no, really? Actually, so standards, yeah, they can be a little bit boring, but it's something that we've got to build into the work that we do. What Backstage gives you, or what it unlocks, is standards through something called software templates. Switch back over.
Yeah.
Look at this is smooth.
Is it working?
Okay, is that working? Awesome, thank you, dude. Okay, so Backstage actually helps you by removing the standards, if you will, from your day-to-day work. With software templates, that gives you basically a way to build in all of these different standards, be that security, be it GDPR, be it just the way that you work for your organization. They can be built into a template by the expert. So the security team can come and build in all of the security things into these templates. And for an engineer, it means you just have to click a button, fill in a form, and it will build the service that you want in the style that your organization works with, and builds all of these standards in there. Not saying you need to, you now are allowed to completely forget about them. You still need to know all of this stuff under the hood, but on a day-to-day, it's gone from, I need to spend an hour or two just making sure I've got all of the right things in there, right? GDPR's in, security requirements are in there, operational stuff is in there, to a few minutes where I fill in a form and hit go. And I'll show you that in a minute. And then ecosystem, we've talked a lot about that. It's the community. Backstage is incredibly extensible. Backstage is actually run by a team of 5 at Spotify, and it has been since the day it was made. That's not grown, but the number of engineers at Spotify has grown. The number of plugins at Spotify has grown. There's now over 200 different plugins in Backstage at Spotify. I don't know what all 200 of them do, and that's a good thing, because those plugins are owned by the experts. Security owns the security plugins. The Kubernetes experts at Spotify own the Kubernetes plugin. The experts own it, and it just surfaces the information that I need to know in the context that I'm working in. So let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. So the first one, centralization of technology assets. I've got plenty of time. Good. Okay. I'm going to chicken out. Now that I've already broke the microphone, I'm going to do a video. So this is the software catalog. You can click in. That's going way quicker than what I was expecting. Come back. This control's going to get annoying in a minute. Can I move that? Can that go somewhere else? No. Okay, that's fine. So, oh God. I'm a professional, I promise. Okay, this is the software catalog. This is the inventory. Thank you very much. It's great to see you all. Good night. I'm just going to hit play and let it play, and I'll talk about it afterwards. Move that. Go away. There we go. So this is the catalog. This is your inventory. We've just clicked into a service here. It's an API. We can find out who consumes the API. We can click into definitions, see definitions about the API, and get all of the, again, it's context, documentation, it's information in context of this thing that we're looking at. I can then go back to the catalog. We can filter by where it is in lifecycle, production, for example. I'm going to click on this app, the lunch app. You can see over on the right, it's a little blurry, but here's our API. It's something we're consuming. In this context, because it's service, we've got CI/CD. We've got all of these other plugins across the top that are relevant to the information that, to the service or component that we're looking at. And it pulls depths of information from, in this instance, GitHub as an example. Again, consumed APIs, there's the flight API. And I can click right into documentation against the context. That's really, really fast. But effectively, what we've done is We can look at a component or a service. We can define the context of that by saying, in the case of an API, we want the definition plugin there. In the case of a service, we want to see a CI/CD, we want to see documentation, so on and so forth. You stay in the context you're at, the lunch app or the flight API, and it brings that information to you, rather than you having to switch into all of the different places. We talked a little bit about standards. My favorite, yay! Still no, okay. I tried. So let's have a look at that in process. So we go to create. I want to create a new service. I'm going to create a React app. This is my form. I'm just going to fill in the name. I'm going to give it a description and an owner. I'm then going to tell it where it's hosted. Then an owner on there, an owning repository. And I'm going to hit next, and I'm going to hit create. So what this is actually doing now is running through a software template in the background. That template has all of those standards built in. So it's got your GDPR, it's got your security, so on and so forth that we talked about. I don't have to think about that. It's structured in the same way that the rest of my services, like the recommended path, if you will, is for Spotify. And it goes away and creates it in minutes. It's created the repository on, in this case, on GHE, where we're working at Spotify. And I can even go and click into it. It's going to take me to the catalog where it's already connected to all of those other plugins. We've got CI/CD already integrated for this service. We've got code insights, APIs, dependencies, docs are already generated and put right next to the code, all connected together. So no longer do I have to go and create this service, think about all of these standards, connect it to this, make sure it's integrated over there, all built in. And the best thing is the templates are extensible. You can make your own templates. There's example ones in there. Spotify currently runs about 50, 55 different ones, I think. But that's templates. That's how we deal with the standards question. Another one is onboarding that I wanted to show. So onboarding is hard. At Spotify, we do a thing called the Engineering Bootcamp. And the Engineering Bootcamp follow what we call the golden paths. We have a golden path for backend, for front end, for mobile, for all sorts of different experiences. But the power here is we generate all of the golden path documentation in TechDocs, which is one of our plugins. And that documentation is stored as Markdown right next to the code in the same repository. So as an engineer, as I'm creating a new service, as I'm working on it, when we create with software templates, it already creates a base documentation thing for you. But as you go in to modify something, right there next to the code you're working on is a Markdown file with the documentation on it. You might as well update it while you're there. So it's a way to keep documentation up to date. And in this instance, having the documentation in, I'm not going to try and click and move through this video, I've had that lesson, I've learned that lesson. Having the documentation in Backstage means you can deep link it through to all of the real plugins, all of the real integrations. So you can have an interactive tutorial, if you will, to onboard to your company through TechDocs in Backstage and have it actually, like, it updates everything in Backstage as you go through. If you're looking at a piece of documentation for creating a new backend service, and if there's like a create button in there, you hit that, it's going to take you to the create in software templates. And so you're in there as a new starter. You're kind of interacting with the tooling while learning at the same time. Just a couple of bits around the philosophy of Backstage and that side of things. So effectively, Backstage, as I say, it's a single pane of glass. It's an interface. It's not designed to replace all of these different tools. What it's designed to do is surface the right information at the right time. It's also about empowering autonomy and empowering the ownership of the teams. Back before Backstage, before I was working at Spotify, Spotify was known for kind of organizational side of things. We released papers around tribes and guilds and missions and all of these kind of funky words to describe the way that we work and the way that we collaborate. But if you boil all of that down, fundamentally, what it was all about was empowering individual teams to own their own destiny, to make their own decisions, and remain autonomous against a huge landscape of engineering function that was at Spotify. Backstage reinforces this. I don't own the Kubernetes plugin at Spotify. I'll be honest, I couldn't tell you how that plugin works. I could go a step further and say I don't really understand how Kubernetes works either. I do my best. But who does own that is the experts. The people at Spotify who own the Kubernetes infrastructure for Spotify own the Kubernetes plugin. And Backstage gives them the literal ownership of that plugin. We manage it through code owners in GitHub at Spotify. But effectively, the Backstage team has no input on what happens with that plugin. What we do is provide tools, we provide interfaces, we provide UI elements and things to try and encourage consistency. But otherwise, that team knows best. Why take that away from them? So Backstage empowers that side of things. It is a platform inside and out. Effectively, the UI layer. Within there, you can have a series of plugins, each plugin owned by somebody else, created by somebody else, created from somewhere else. Each of those plugins can have its own backend to relay information. Could have a proxy, like Circle CI there, going out and connecting Circle CI and pulling information in. They can have their own databases to pull things through. Or, like TechRadar down at the bottom, they are just a front-end plugin with a configuration. The flexibility is over to you, what you want to create, how you want to create it. Okay. For us, effectiveness is a function of productivity and happiness. Sounds silly, but a lot of tools, back when I was doing engineering day to day, you get a command line interface and that's it. Like, run that, you'll be fine. And then it does some things and splurts out a bunch of different text and then you're like, I guess it worked. Backstage is trying to treat engineers, engineering teams as human beings. We want something that is going to draw us back to it. We want something that is simple to use, it's easy to use, something that looks nice when we're using it, something that is consistent. All of this plays into basically helping to bring productivity and increase happiness. We are, as Spotify, bringing more opinions. So open source is always going to be open source. Backstage is always going to be open source, the whole platform. But then we are bringing now some more opinionated plugins that are not part of the open source, but you can purchase and plug into your instance. But these become very opinionated. This is what has worked for us. For the past 10 years, this has helped us. And we've got new things like Soundcheck. We've got things like Skill Exchange, Pulse. So we have like making sure your services are good and healthy with Soundcheck. Skill Exchange, sharing opportunities with other engineers if they want to go and embed or work with on a project. Pulse, tracking the pulse of things, tracking the status. I think it's going to bring more across. RBAC, self-explanatory, I think. Role-based authentication. Insights into your platform. So all this being said, this is Backstage at Spotify. This is just the home screen. You can see there's a few things going on here. We have a few plugins down the left-hand side here. Search, self-explanatory. Explore, so you can go and explore documentation and things like that. Manage is our catalog. We have an experimentation platform. There's a few things down the side there. I've added some favorites and things. I've got quick access to some things and a toolbox of stuff. Now, one question I always get when people say, hey, we're thinking about adopting Backstage, they'll see what Spotify has and say, hey, how do we get that? I want that. That's a thing that I want. No, you don't. Backstage at Spotify has 200 different plugins that are geared towards making Spotify productive. It has a homepage that's laid out to make me more productive in the things that I'm doing at Spotify. What you want, really, is to identify what's the one piece of value, what's the problem that you have that is making you think about Backstage. Once you know what that one thing is, get an instance of Backstage, get the plugins that are relevant to your problem, and try and solve that one use case. If you do that, you'll then show value to all of the stakeholders, all of the engineers, and eventually, if you keep doing that, there'll be a tipping point where all of a sudden, new ideas, new things are coming from the community, not just from you. So do you want what Spotify's got? Not really. But Backstage is flexible enough that you can implement the pieces that you need. And to give you one example and to leave you with maybe a funny story, I'm going to talk about being in hospital. So maybe it's funny, I don't know. This is Backstage. Now this was done by a company called Weaveworks early on in the COVID-19 pandemic. And what they did was they took Backstage, the platform, and they took a problem that they saw that they wanted to solve for. Now that problem was helping doctors to diagnose cases of COVID-19 early on in the pandemic, before we knew a lot about it, and enable them to do that quicker. There's a whole kind of thing with hospitals, rightfully so. When it comes to someone's health, you want to triple check everything. But that means there's a lot of steps to go through. What this version of Backstage did was effectively accepted X-ray scans of lungs, as you can see here, and then ran a comparison against different models and gave indicators immediately to the doctor within minutes of whether it's possibly COVID-19 or not, and pointed out the areas and things they should look at from these scans. We never thought of that when we were releasing Backstage. That was something completely Wild West. And I can take it even a step further. Last year, I was incredibly ill for a bunch of months. Getting old is fantastic. But it meant I got the pleasure around Christmas time to get to go and have some procedures at my local hospital. Fantastic, highly recommend it. Royal London Hospital is great. You know, if you ever get a chance, go there. But one of the things they wanted to do was put a camera down my throat, and I was terrified. And on the day I got there, and the doctors are there, and you know, they're trying to calm you down. And the doctor that was running the procedure, he's like, right, what do you do? What's your job? Where do you work? Oh, I work at Spotify. Oh, that's great. We use a piece of software from Spotify. Oh, fantastic. And all the time, you know, the doctor's thinking he's calming me down. I'm thinking, why is he talking about work? That's the last thing I want to be thinking. You know, like I'm about to get on this table thing and they're going to, you know, I don't want to do that. So he's having this conversation, and if ever you've had one of these cameras, they wheel you into a room where you're on what I can only describe as an operating theater table. There's this massive machine that looks like something out of sci-fi and is terrifying, you know, and there's somebody there with this probe thing that they're going to come and attack you with. And then there's a bunch of computers where they get these, you know, like here, you've got the lung scans where they get these pictures. So I'm lying there on the table, and he's trying to calm me down. Give fantastic drugs, again, highly recommend, Royal London. But then he's like, they do this thing, and they take photos and stuff like that, and I'm here today because of these people and helping me out in this situation. But I'm lying there, and I'm a little bit, you know, and he swings this monitor around. I told you we use software from Spotify, what do you call it? It was this. Just replace the images of the lungs with my insides and you get the idea. At the time, I didn't really want to talk to him, obviously, about it. I was kind of a bit distracted. But it was a real life, real thing that I never thought could happen. That the project that I work on, that when I started at Spotify was just an internal project and there was no talk of open source, to now having this big community, and from a health perspective, it was part of the tool chain that helped me get better. It's ridiculous. So just one example, Backstage that Spotify has doesn't have to look like this, doesn't have to look like what you get at the end. It can look like anything, including things like this in different industries. With that, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to open it up if anybody has any questions. I think we've got about 10 minutes or so to go.